Okay, so as promised, we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We're here to talk about a proposed air permit for Revere Dock. So this is going to be an information session and a hearing tonight. We'll talk a little bit more about logistics, but the first thing I want to do is have the staff folks that I have with me go ahead and turn their cameras on just for a minute. We're going to do some quick introductions, and then I'm going to turn it over to our division director to give you guys just a welcome to the meeting. So as I'm looking at my screen here, so all right, so staff people, mostly who you're going to hear from tonight is myself, unfortunately for you, or maybe fortunately, and I'm Jennifer Dixon. I work with our environmental support division, and I mostly support air quality division, helping moderate meetings and things like that. So if you've been to any of these before, you've probably seen me. Also, I have Andy Drury. He is the permit engineer for this project. So he's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation prior to our question and answer tonight. I also have Jeff Korniski with us. He is our Detroit District Office Assistant Supervisor. So he's going to be here to answer questions from a district kind of standpoint once we get to that. I have Susan Kilmer here. She works with our air monitoring unit. So she is going to be available to talk about those kinds of questions. Mike Deppa is with our air toxics. So if we have questions on air toxics that come up, we'll be putting those over to Mike to answer. I also have some folks from outside of Air Quality Division, Josh Shields, Andy Hartz, and Marcus Quinlan. So you're going to be introduced to them a little bit later on tonight, and they're going to be available for the question and answer session. So if you have questions that are not necessarily air quality related, we wanted to make sure that we had folks here to hopefully be able to address some of those questions as well. So Marianne, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. My other staff people can turn their cameras off if they'd like, but Marianne Dolahanty is our air quality division director, and I'm going to just turn it over her really quickly so she can give you all a welcome to the evening tonight. So Marianne, whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So first of all, I'd like to personally thank you all for taking the time out of your evening to participate in this informational session and public hearing. I know this is a rough time for a lot of people. There's a lot of challenges that we're facing. And of course, it's the holidays, which adds another layer of complexity. Public participation is very important to the Air Quality Division and to Eagle. It's a vital way for us to work towards the mission of protecting public health and environment. It also creates avenues for a conversation as well as a discussion on the proposed fugitive dust plan for the Revere Dock site. Just so you know, this permit is written with the public and the environment in mind, and it comes to you in draft form. We do appreciate your flexibility in participating with us virtually. We understand, again, that these are challenging times. Everybody's going through their own personal, unique situation with yourselves and your families. And while not ideal, this method of public participation has been quite successful and, not perfect, but as always, we welcome your thoughts. Please feel free to share those with us. If you have ideas for ways we can improve our outreach, we are more than welcome, or we are more than open to hearing those and welcome your feedback. So I'll be listening tonight so that my decision on this proposed permit keeps you, your comments and your concerns in mind. And again, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Marianne, thank you so much for that. I agree with you. The holidays are extra special this year. I guess we could say that for sure. So, all right, well, getting down to the brass tacks of everything tonight, I want to run through how the evening is going to run because it is a little different virtually than in person. And so I want to just make sure that we have everybody on the same page for that. So the first thing we're going to do is do the information session. So the information session is in part a presentation that you're going to be hearing from the permit engineer, that's Andy Drury, and he's going to kind of run you through what air quality does, kind of our functions within the state, and then what the draft permit looks like, what are some of the elements of it, what could you expect to see, what you might be commenting on. In relation to that, I also want to let you know right now is that in your chat box is a link to the permit documents. Now you can't chat back to me in that. You're going to have to use the question and answer, and I will talk to you about that in a second. But I wanted to be able to share that link with people in case you haven't had a chance to look at some of the documents that are supporting the, or that are like background information, out in supporting, but background information for the draft permit, some technical documents, some, you know, sort of maybe easier to read documents are there as well in case you haven't had a chance to look at those. After we get done with the presentation, we'll go into a question and answer. So that will be where you all can ask questions of staff and we'll be responding back to you. So you can do that a couple ways, ask those questions in a couple ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. The public hearing is going to start at 7 o'clock or when we are done with question and answer, whatever comes first. So if there's a ton of questions, we might not get to them before 7. We will try to respond directly to you. So if you registered or entered into the meeting with an email address, we'd be able to get back to you on that. So that's kind of how that will go. The public hearing, as just to remind everyone, is a time where you get to tell us what you think about things, but we won't necessarily be responding to you. It's a little bit more of a formal process. And so if you have questions, you definitely want to get those done in the question and answer part of the night. Because the public comment period does not end at the end of the meeting tonight, like when we do in-person meetings, a lot of times we would end that public comment period right at the end of the meeting. It goes on for a few more days until December 18th. And so you have plenty of time to still submit comments. So we'll talk about other ways that you can do that if you aren't comfortable or not ready to do that here tonight. I'm also going to just remind you about other places that you can find information about this proposed permit. And also I will give you all of our panelists' contact information in case you want that. So as a reminder, you will all be muted. And so that means until we get to that question and answer part and I unmute you, you won't be able to speak back to us. And we are recording this meeting. We post all of our public meetings on our YouTube channel. So if you really love public meetings and you want to watch some more, they are there for your viewing pleasure. We do close caption all of these meetings. So if you do know someone who wasn't able to participate tonight because of a language barrier, those are all closed caption with the ability to do a translation. It is not perfect, I will put that out there, but the closed caption translation is helpful for some of our residents who may have English as a second language. So if you want to ask a question, this is the important part. So you're going to click on that question and answer button at the bottom of your screen and go ahead and type your question into that question and answer box. And once we get to that, so feel free to type those in at any time while Andy or myself is talking. You might want to say, Jennifer, why do you keep talking? That's a valid question. You can go ahead and enter that in there as well if you would like to. If you want to raise your hand because you really feel strongly about speaking your question verbally, you're just going to click that raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. And I just want to check and see if I have anyone calling in tonight. So I don't have anyone calling in right now, but if we do have folks that actually just call in, we will unmute lines to have them be able to speak if they would like to as well. So Andy, at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen over mine at any time, you can feel free to go ahead and do that and make sure you unmute your mic so we can all hear you. And we do have 2 Andys tonight, so that'll make it extra, extra fun as well. All right, we see your screen and once you're unmuted, you should be ready to go.
All set. So good evening. My name, as Jennifer said, is Andy Drury, and I'm the permit engineer for the air permit application for Revere Dock's proposed fugitive dust plan. So I'm going to start with an overview of the air quality division and then talk about the proposed dust plan. So air pollution comes from many different operations, as we know, such as farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the air quality division is to protect public health and the environment, and we have authority to do this by regulating industrial sources. There we go. So the AQD is separated into different functions. For example, air quality staff monitor levels of air pollutants. Other staff look at different toxics to make sure public health is protected. The AQD conducts inspections of regulated facilities. And we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure the operations comply with our rules and regulations. So we have authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I want to point out a few items that we do not have authority to regulate. You'll want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concern about issues like zoning, noise, and traffic. So Revere Dock brings bulk materials to the site by ship or by truck. Those materials are stored or handled at the site for a period of time before being transported off-site. Detroit Bulk Storage has a lease arrangement with Revere Dock and also does bulk material handling and storage at the facility. And Revere Dock is asking for a fugitive dust control program for their operations that complies with the state rules and Act 451. So what is fugitive dust? It is dust that cannot be captured and exhausted through a stack. Fugitive dust can be caused by wind blowing across the storage piles, by adding material to storage piles, by removing material from storage piles, and by trucks that are driving on the site. Fugitive dust regulations were put in place due to high particulate levels in parts of the state decades ago. We no longer have a significant dust problem, but the regulations are still in place. Rule 371 allows us to require a company to submit a fugitive dust control program based on ambient air quality measurements or substantive complaints. But AQD monitoring data does not show problems around Revere Dock, and there have not been substantive dust complaints, so we have not requested a program from Revere Dock. Revere Dock has voluntarily submitted the Fugitive Dust Control Program. Rule 372 outlines requirements and typical controls for fugitive dust control programs. Act 451, known as the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, or NREPA, has requirements in it. It limits opacity, it requires control measures, and requires an operating program to reduce fugitive dust emissions. So Revere's fugitive dust plan includes the following requirements based on the rules and the law. So for material handling operations, Revere is required to use water if there are visible emissions, clean up material around conveyor belts and transfer points, limit stacker conveyor operations during high winds, and that would be winds of 25 miles an hour or over, minimize the time needed for loading and unloading trucks, and cover trucks that are hauling bulk materials. The dust plan also has requirements for visible emissions or opacity, and it's limited to 5% for roads, lots, and storage piles. Other sources would be limited to 20%. So what is opacity? Opacity is the amount of the view that is blocked measured in percent. So fog is an example of opacity. Thicker fog blocks more of the view. So the thicker the fog is, the higher the opacity is. And a car windshield can also have opacity. When the windshield is clean, you can see through it, and the opacity is very low. However, as we know, when driving on slushy roads, the windshield gets dirty and you can't see through it, so the opacity is high. And in this picture, the trees are fully visible, so the opacity is 0. When a truck drives by on a road that has some dust on it, the trees are not as visible, and this is opacity. So this is an example here of 5% opacity. If the road is dirtier, more dust is kicked up by the truck, so the opacity is higher and the trees are not as visible. And this is an example of 20% opacity. And from this illustration, we can see that 5% opacity is not very much. The trees are still very visible. And 5% is the limit in the proposed dust plan for roads, lots, and storage piles. The dust plan also has requirements for equipment traffic. Revere is required to apply water to open areas, lots, and roadways if the visible emissions exceed the 5% opacity limit. Sweep up the roadways, clean material that's spilled on open areas, lots, and roadways. Limit vehicle speed to 15 miles per hour. And remove material from tires and the underside of trucks leaving the site using rumble strips, a gravel pad, and or a water wash to ensure that the material is not dragged out onto the roads. For storage piles, Revere would be required to treat them with water if the visible emissions exceed the 5% limit, and also use chemical dust suppressant solutions if needed to control the dust. They would have to monitor weather to ensure the material handling is limited during high winds, that's more than 25 miles an hour. They have to sweep around the storage piles and limit the pile heights to 50 feet. Screening and crushing operations would also be required to use wet suppression, misting, or other means to control the dust. The fugitive dust plan requires record keeping of weather conditions, the type and volume of materials stored, and records of dust suppressant application. The permit conditions also have required records for material throughput to show compliance with the throughput limits that are in the permit conditions. And the AQD will conduct inspections and respond to citizen complaints to ensure the fugitive dust plan and the permit are being complied with. During inspections, AQD staff would evaluate visible emissions from operations at the facility, evaluate the roadways and areas around conveyors and storage piles to ensure that they are swept up and that spilled material has been cleaned up, and review records required by the dust plan and the permit conditions, and ensure that Revere Dock is complying with dust plan requirements and the permit conditions, including the throughput limits. According to the application, Revere Dock can handle a variety of dry bulk materials at the facility, including aggregates like sand, gravel, and crushed stone, metals, scrap metal, clay, cement blocks, slag, asphalt grindings, minerals, limestone, crushed concrete, aluminum ingots, iron ore, and salt. So there are other potential concerns with the facility here. One of them is petroleum coke. Revere Dock is not proposing to store petroleum coke at the facility, and an air permit, a separate air permit, would be required to authorize storage of petroleum coke. And there's also the dock collapse that from November of 2019 that people are interested in, and this air permit is not related to the dock collapse or to the remediation and restoration activities. And no air permit is required for these remediation and restoration activities to be done. So there are some benefits of the fugitive dust plan. Primarily, it will formalize steps that Revere Dock has to take to ensure the fugitive dust emissions from the facility do not negatively impact the area around the facility. So that is the end of my presentation, Jennifer.
Thanks a lot, Andy. So we're going to be going into another brief little section here, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen back over Andy's a second. All righty. Okay, so what we want to do now is have our other divisions that I mentioned earlier. Andy kind of alluded to this a little bit. We know that there's some other concerns about Revere Dock just in general, and that's why we wanted to make sure we had our other staff people on the horn today to kind of answer some questions. But what I want them to do first is, so Josh and Andy Hartz and Marcus, if you guys could go ahead and turn your cameras on. I'm going to kind of point to you one at a time. And if you could just sort of give the folks, you know, a little bit about what your role is with the department or with Revere Dock in general, and then give kind of an update on what you're doing. So Andy Hart, since you are on the top for me, I'm going to call on you first. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and then give that little update.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Andy Hartz. I'm the one of the district supervisors for the Water Resource Division in the Warren District Office. Specifically, I supervise the Resource Unit, which is the unit that administers the state's Wetland Protection Act, Floodplain Authority, the Submerged Lands Act, as well as Part 301, the Inland Lakes and Streams Act. As we know, the facility had a shoreline dock collapse in November 2019. Over last winter, the spring and early summer, Water Division worked with Revere Dock people to not only get a permit application in, and we had a public hearing on that issue, Water did back in June of 2020, but as well as a companion consent agreement that the company entered into. And what the permit does is authorizes all the work, and the consent agreement basically sets forth a time schedule to complete the work that the permit authorizes. So a permit doesn't compel people to do work, permit authorizes people to do work. The consent agreement is the vehicle that compels the company to complete the permitted activity within a certain time frame. In October 2020, late October 2020, I believe, they started to install the H pile along the shoreline, and that is basically the Deadman system, and that's the system in which ultimately the seawall will be attached to. The shoreline here is a real problematic old pile supported concrete, and so before any of the material can be removed from the river, the seawall has to be installed. So the land needs to be stable in order to dredge the material out from waterward of the seawall. So the seawall construction commenced very quickly after the consent agreement and the permit was issued. We have a site inspection planned for next Thursday, December 17th, just to look at the progress of some of that issue. And I believe the consent agreement and their own schedule has them completing most of this work, I think by May or June of 2021.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy, for that. And like Andy will be around, obviously, if folks have questions for him a little bit later. But Josh, I'm going to pass it over to you. So if you kind of give us a little bit of a idea of what it is that you do with the department and Revere, and then go ahead and give your update as well. That'd be great.
Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Josh Shields, as Jennifer mentioned. I'm an incident management specialist in the remediation and redevelopment division. And my role since the incident, as I'll call it, happened, I've just been the point of contact for, again, the remediation and redevelopment division. And my primary role has been to ensure that the responsible or liable party, in this case, Revere Dock LLC, has met their due care obligations. And those obligations can be summed up as they need to provide protections to their workers and to the public to prevent anybody from coming under any undue exposure to contamination that may be on the property, or in this case now in the river. And so we've worked with the liable party and their contractors to ensure that interim measures were put in place, such as a silt curtain to prevent sediment from sloughing off the seawall that fell into the river, to create any, any turbidity issues from soil that may be, again, sloughing off that shoreline that may contain contamination. And so we've worked with them to ensure that they're capturing that sediment material and keeping it closer on the property itself. They've installed erosion control blankets, erosion control socks, and they've constructed berms. All of these measures were put into place to try to stabilize or control the situation, as I'll call it, to prevent any material, again, from sloughing off and going into the river and creating any type of potential risk to human health or the environment. And along with that, for their workers, they've installed security fencing, and they've got other measures in place to protect themselves and to keep folks out from, again, coming into contact with any potential contamination that may be on the property. So in a nutshell, that's been my effort, just to ensure from a regulatory standpoint, they're meeting their requirements, again, as we call it, these due care obligations.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate that. And last but not least, I'm going to pass it over to Marcus Quinlan. Marcus, if you can kind of give us your rundown, that would be great.
Sure. Like Jennifer said, my name is Marcus Quinlan. I'm the Radiation Safety Officer within the Radiological Protection Section, which is within the Materials Management Division of Eagle. I was involved in the initial response and taking some of the surveys at Revere Dock. Since then, the EPA has conducted extensive gamma radiation surveying and soil and water testing, and the results of those surveys and testings are consistent with the radiological testing and surveying conducted by Argonne National Labs and the Department of Energy in the 1980s and 90s, that there is no evidence of general contamination resultant from the former processing of uranium at the site. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. This is a very interesting site. So I appreciate the three of you guys being on to kind of help us if we get any questions. So we are going to move to our Q&A portion. So I'm just going to put up a list of our staff. So if I can have the rest of my staff go ahead and turn their cameras on. I don't have any questions right now. So just reminding folks, if you want to ask some questions, go ahead and type them in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, or you are obviously more than welcome to raise your hand and I will unmute you. I don't have anybody calling in right now, so we won't have to unmute those folks. if we do get somebody calling in a little bit later, that would be, also fine. All right. So there was a couple things, Josh, that I noticed when you were talking, and I think when we talk about a site that's really complex like this, we use a lot of our own lingo. So I had been putting in the chat a couple things, definitions for folks. Ambient air, we always get that one. We tried a little bit harder with opacity this time to kind of figure out, like, how can we talk about opacity? People hear that word, they don't really get what it means. It's kind of one of those terms that we use a lot. So Josh, you had mentioned the word turbidity, which is a word that I don't know that everyone, and in reference in combined with sloughing off and turbidity all at the same time. So I didn't know if you had like more of an easier way to explain that, or maybe I could say how I understand it is you're looking for dirt or things coming off the shore and getting into the water that's making the water look cloudy. Is that like kind of a plain language way of describing that, or please add on and tell me where I'm wrong on that one?
Yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, I could probably piggyback on what Andy had mentioned earlier regarding opacity. And think of it opacity, in this case, in water, right? So if you have clear water, then you have low or no turbidity. If you've got cloudy water, then in this case, you would have, a high turbidity. And that turbidity would be the result of, in this case, material, I keep saying the word sloughing off, but, material that's coming off of this collapsed seawall, which could be soil or concrete or, dust or debris that's getting into the water and creating this cloudy water, as you put it, and resulting in turbid conditions.
Well, I appreciate that you verified that I kind of knew what I was thinking there. So thank you. I appreciate that. When I think of sloughing off, I always think of like biology class when you were talking about skin cells and things like that. So I don't know, just one of those terms that I want to make sure folks understand. And so thank you for that. We did get a question, and this is going to be for Andy Drury. And the question is related to the dust plan. And the question is, how is Revere planning to show plans to comply with the city's dust ordinance? So if you can talk a little bit about that, Andy, I'd appreciate it.
Well, the city's dust ordinance is really separate from this permitting process. We have no jurisdiction to enforce the city ordinance. So the city ordinance is really separate from this permit. Revere will have to work with the city to show how they're going to comply with the dust plan or with the city's ordinance. It's not part of our permitting process. You are muted, Jennifer.
Thank you. I usually don't make that mistake on these. I thank you for letting me know as I was reading this. I think this one's going to go to you as well, Andy, and we might have to tag Jeff Korniski on this one too, but I'm going to just kind of read it. It has a couple of questions in it, so I'll read it once and then we can kind of parse it out a little bit. So it says, Detroit Bulk Storage has a dust plan on file. Does it apply to this site? So does Detroit Bulk Storage have a separate dust plan that applies to this site as well? Because I think you had mentioned in your presentation that they either rent out a portion of the site or something like that. So if you can talk about that first. So keep that in mind. I'm going to read the rest of the question though. How often does Eagle do site inspections to ensure that plans are being followed? Detroit Bulk Storage had a serious incident in 2013 at a different site just east of Revere where their piles of pet coke blew away. They were supposed to be using a latex product to minimize dust and they were using water instead, which was counter to their plan and ineffective. So how can we be assured that they will be in compliance going forward? So Andy, I don't know, first I just wanted to know if you know anything about Detroit Bulk Storage's dust plan and if it applies to this site location as well. And if you don't, that's okay. We can pass that over to Jeff because I think he probably knows.
Yep, well, I know about that because I issued that permit as well. So
okay, awesome.
That was before the dock collapse when people really were not interested in the site. So we didn't do any public outreach for that.
Okay.
So it's a little bit complicated. DBS has a permit that covers the entire site. This permit for Revere covers Revere's operations. So Revere has to comply with, would have to, if this permit's issued, comply with their dust plan and this permit. They would also have to comply with DBS's dust plan because it applies to the entire site. The flip side is the DBS permit does not have any throughput limits. The Revere Dock
define what a throughput limit is just for folks.
Limit Yep, that is how much material that they can move through the site each year. So this proposed permit has a limit for Revere Dock for their operations, and then a site-wide limit. And so DBS and Revere together have to comply with that site-wide limit. So it's a little bit complicated.
But it sounds like it would, if it issued, it would be a little bit more restrictive than it is right now too, at least for Revere, because they would have to be tracking those material throughput limits that you spoke of.
Yeah, it has throughput that DBS's permit does not have.
Okay, so, and then I'm gonna send this one over to Jeff. So Jeff, if you can talk about, because you're the assistant district supervisor there in Detroit, and I know your inspectors are the ones that would go out and be inspecting for compliance with this dust plan. So could you talk a little bit about the, how often that would happen and sort of what your staff would actually be looking for me?
Sure. So for dust plans that have been issued in the last year or so, including what would be presumably this one if it is issued, we would do an inspection within this calendar year to follow up on compliance. We also do random surveillance. We're always driving down around in that area for various sites because the industry is so concentrated along the riverfront that even when we're going to other sites, we drive by on West Jefferson, this site and others, and can do surveillance on opacity and track out and other various aspects of fugitive dust that we would observe. We would also follow up on complaints that we would receive for this site and other sites. So that's how we would follow up with surveillance and inspections. Like I said, for not only this permit, but for most other permits, once it's issued, we try to make it out there at least within the year to make sure that our expectations are being met. The commenter is correct in that this facility, or I should say the other facility on this site, Detroit Bulk Storage, had a very serious problem with petroleum coke stored along the riverfront around 2013. They were actually storing it in two locations. One was on the River Rouge site and one was on their Detroit site near Rosa Parks. And because of that experience, you'll notice that Andy Drury in his presentation indicated that they will not be storing pet coke at this site because of what we learned during that experience. We make a special provision in terms of that you have to get a permit to install to store petroleum coke at a site in the state. It's worth noting that this fugitive dust plan arises out of the actual Act 451, which is the overarching Environmental Protection Act that we all work under in the state of Michigan. And it's a special provision in there that requires certain sources if you're located in a specific area and if you do a certain type of business to get a dust control plan. That's separate from what is typically the reason that people get permits, which is under our Rule 201, which says that you can't install anything without first getting a permit. And when we speak about getting a permit for petroleum coke, we're speaking about getting an actual permit to install arising from our rule, which says that you cannot store any petroleum coke without getting a permit from us, because we found that material was much more easily entrained into the ambient air. Water didn't work hardly at all. It was very difficult to control emissions from wind-blown dust from those storage piles, unlike almost any other material that we had experience with. So, petroleum coke is a recognized issue. It's stored, right now it's stored at Marathon Petroleum in an enclosure, at least a three-sided enclosure, at least the top is open and enclosed on all other sides. So yes, we are very well aware of Detroit Bulk Storage's history with petroleum coke.
Well, and it's definitely something that we would keep an eye on too. And I know your staff, I appreciate that you mentioned that you do respond to complaints. Jeff's staff are ready to go if folks have complaints to give a call. We'll give that contact information a little bit later. You can always reach out to Jeff either via email or on the phone. He welcomes that, and he will definitely get his staff out there to check out what's going on. And I know Andy kind of tried to show folks what the difference in opacity kind of looks like. 5% is a very low amount of opacity. When our staff get trained to read opacity, we actually go to a special training to do that. It's something you almost sometimes can't see, it's so low. So, you know, they are being held to a very high standard if this fugitive dust plan permit would be issued. So we have a couple other questions. Andy, this one, Andy Drury, I need to say which Andy, this one is going to go to you, and it involves the paving in the lots at the facility. So can Eagle require paving of bare lots to better control track out of dust on truck tires? So track out is when the tires become kind of covered with dirt and then that's carried off the property, rather than the excessive watering of tires, if that even does get done, or permeable paving of certain parts of the lots would likely be preferable so that there would be sort of that water control. So I don't know if you can kind of talk about how we look at that proposed plan when it comes in from the facility and sort of what the company proposed or what we might expect to see if this fugitive dust plan is issued.
Yeah, for Revere Dock, they have been operating, and DBS has been operating there for quite a long time. And so I don't think we have had issues with any track out onto the road, as far as I know. And Jeff would be able to confirm that because they drive by there, and that is something that the inspectors look for. We could require other methods of dust control like paving if there are problems, if Revere Dock is not able to meet their opacity limits with the facility as proposed. But at this point, we don't think that requiring pavement is needed for them to be able to comply with the regulations.
So that's a really good point though, Andy. So if folks start to really notice track out, and Jeff's office is getting a lot of complaints from residents about that becoming an issue, this is one of those things where we can go back to the company and say, hey, look, what you are doing isn't working. You need to do more. So that's definitely a kind of a tool that we have in our pocket if that would ever come up. Here's another question. So this is an interesting one, and I'm not sure if it's one that we can necessarily deal with, but I'm going to put it out there. Andy, I'm going to put it to you, but I'm not sure that you would necessarily be able to answer it because it wouldn't necessarily be something we permitted, but maybe you know of one of the facilities that you've written these kind of permits for that have proposed something similar. So you could talk about it. But it says, can a vegetative buffer be required between the Revere Dock site and historic Fort Wayne? There may be many different dust sources to come, and the fort is currently seeking investment for increasing future use. So have we seen that sort of option for a vegetative buffer come in, or have we ever recommended that you know of in a situation like this?
It's really not something that we have authority to require. I mean, a vegetative buffer is really not going to do much to help meet the air quality standards, which is really our goal here. Sometimes companies will offer to do things voluntarily, and we can put that in the permit, and they would then have to comply with that. But you know, it's not something that we can impose on them if they don't want to do that, because really a vegetative buffer is not going to do a lot. It would look nice, it would be, you know, beneficial, but it really doesn't do a lot for controlling dust emissions to meet the air quality standards.
So where we tend to see companies having these as being, quote, required is when we are doing enforcement actions and they do this as part of a supplemental environmental project, where instead of paying a complete amount of their fine, they choose to do an environmental project that would benefit the community, or something like historic Fort Wayne. And right now we don't really have anything like that going on, but I think that's something good that we can put in our enforcement supervisor's pocket. So what I mean by that is I'm going to send a note to Janine Camilleri, who's our air enforcement supervisor. She works with a lot of companies in this area, and when they do want to do those supplemental environmental projects, it's always good to have ones that we know the community might be interested in that could work for that. So I'll definitely at least let her know that that was brought up at the meeting tonight. Andy Drury, this one is going to you too. And the question is, are there height restrictions or limits for the piles of material? For instance, higher piles tend to blow more material from the top if they're too high. So I don't know if you can talk about whether or not that is in the permit, the proposed permit or not.
Yeah, the proposed dust plan does have a limit of 50 feet for the height of piles. So that is as tall as Revere would be allowed to make them.
Sorry, sometimes my little bar just disappears on me. So thank you for that. I couldn't remember for sure, so I'm glad that you're here so you can answer that question. So I don't have any other questions right now. I'm going to give you guys just a second to see if you think of any more before we go ahead and move into the hearing. I don't want to jump into that too quickly because I want to make sure folks have every opportunity to ask questions that they want to get asked. And like I said, this isn't your only opportunity to ask staff questions. Staff that you see here tonight are, definitely able and willing to answer questions that you might have after this meeting, that you're, maybe looking at some of the information that we've posted about the facility. And before you make a comment, before you write in a comment or phone in a comment, you want to get a question answered. And that's, something that we're very, very open to. We appreciate that people want to do that because it makes it nicer for us. Sometimes we don't know what your concerns might be, and so it makes it harder for us to address those when we can. All right. Just trying to think. Usually I have a lot of questions for staff. I know they love that. They're like, Jennifer, please stop asking us questions, but okay. Well, seeing that you guys aren't having any other questions come in, I just want to check to make sure I don't have anybody who has called in tonight. And I don't see anyone calling in. So if that were the case, I would definitely want to make sure that they had an opportunity to voice any questions that they had. All right, so we're going to go into this hearing portion. So all staff besides Marianne, you are off the hook for now. So thank you very much for answering those questions. Much appreciated. If you want to turn your videos off, you can go ahead and do that. And Marianne and I will get ready to do the hearing for tonight. So a little bit about the hearing. Just to remind you that the hearing portion is the part of the night where you will be able to speak your comments out loud, or you can write them into the comment box, into the question and answer box. Either way is totally fine, but we won't be responding to those. So sometimes people will ask a question in their comments, which is completely fine to do. Just remember that we won't be answering those questions here tonight. So if you would like to make a comment, you can type your comment into the question and answer box, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times just so that you know, and we can read that comment out loud for you. Unless you tell me don't read this, then I'm not going to. If you want to voice your question out loud, you can click the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. You can also type in the question box, I'd like to make a comment, and I'll go ahead and unmute you. Like I said, we don't have anybody who is calling in right now, so we won't be worrying about that portion. Okay. So, all right, we're going to enter into the public hearing. I do have to read sort of a kind of stock statement to all of you, so please bear with me on this. I know it's a little bit, it can be a little bit dry. So I'm going to go ahead and read this, and once I get done reading the opening statement, I will call on folks, and I appreciate that we already have people raising their hands. So, okay. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Environmental Support Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. We have Marianne Dolahanty, Air Quality Division Director, the decision maker for this permit application, listening in on the hearing tonight as well. This hearing is for the proposed permit to install for the proposed fugitive dust plan at Revere Dock LLC, hereinafter Revere, located in Detroit, Michigan. I have some background information to share before we begin. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing these responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed fugitive dust plan an opportunity to provide information the department may use in deciding whether to approve the permit to install, or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note the proposed permit to install is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit available will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether this permit will be granted at all. Please recognize the department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria the department must use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within the department's authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We'll be happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed fugitive dust plan. This hearing is being recorded and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed fugitive dust plan. The public comment period for this plan began on October 29, 2020, and it will end at midnight on December 18, 2020. Additional information may be submitted through that time. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the permit application will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approved with amendments. If approved, the permit must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reason for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. As stated previously, you may submit a written comment at any time to the email address provided, which we'll provide after this. You may also type the word comment into the question box and submit your comment. I will read aloud all comments you submit via the question box unless you state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. We will limit your comment time to 3 minutes. If you are speaking, I will let you know when you have about 30 seconds left, and I'll do my best to address commenters in the order your hands are raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have some challenges with that. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed fugitive dust plan and listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will begin calling names of those who have indicated they would like to make a statement. Okay, Senator Chang, you are going to be up first. Let me get you unmuted here. Okay, you should be ready to go as soon as you're ready.
Okay, thanks so much, and excuse all any potential children noises in the background. First of all, thanks so much to Eagle for this public hearing. Always appreciate the opportunity for residents to chime in with their questions and concerns and thoughts. So thank you as always. I had a couple quick comments. I mean, I think one thing that is probably on the minds of a number of folks who are watching and participating today is that, you know, obviously I know that the dock collapse and the consent order is a separate thing, but it's all connected, right? Because when we're talking about our air and our water and our soil, I mean, we need to look at everything all together. And so I think that, you know, I just really hope that we'll make sure that Revere Dock is meeting all of the conditions in the agreement prior to, you know, approval of this kind of a permit. Want to have clear requirements that the operations of this facility won't cause more pollution into the Detroit River. I'm also concerned about the fact that while I understand that Eagle doesn't have, you know, it's not within your jurisdiction to deal with the Detroit Dust Ordinance, I would hope that agencies are working together to ensure compliance, because that dust ordinance was really created to protect our residents from the harmful effects of air pollution. And I understand that this plan, as drafted, does include water spraying if there are visible emissions, but instead we would really like to see full compliance with the dust ordinance, which would include enclosing all areas that have materials handling to make sure that we're controlling dust emissions. Also really hope that the plan can include more information about how these dust control measures will be maintained over time and make sure that they are effective. Also would love to see some information about any sediment control or drainage related issues. And lastly, you know, I think that we would also like to see fence line monitoring requirements added to the permit. as we go forward. Okay, so this is actually the last thing. While I know that this is not necessarily the topic of this hearing, I did want to point out that there has been legislation introduced at the state level related to the collapse from last year. And that legislation would include risk assessment of contaminated properties along our waterways, inspections on a regular basis of commercial and industrial docks, and require notification regarding spills into our waterways. And I want to make sure our residents are aware of those bills, and know that while, of course, this hearing is specifically focused on the fugitive dust plan, I think it's important that we're looking at all of these issues together. So thanks again. Also want to thank everyone that's watching and participating, because your voices really matter. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Chang. We appreciate your comment. At this point, I do not have any other hands raised and I don't have any written comments. So I wanted to give folks just a minute to think about whether or not they would like to make a comment. No pressure, obviously, but I want to make sure that you have every opportunity to do so tonight if you would like to, and not cut anyone off. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so to think about that. And like I said, if you'd like to make a comment verbally, you can either raise your hand or you can type it into the chat box. I would like to make a comment, and I will go ahead and unmute your line. Okay, Simone Segovac, if I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and I probably mispronounced your name, I apologize. So if you'd like to just say your name and go ahead with your comment whenever you're ready.
Sure, thank you, Simone Segovac. I work with the Southwest Detroit Community Benefit.
Oh, Simone, I think we lost you there a second.
Oops, I'm sorry.
I apologize. That was
my name.
Nope, go ahead, you're good.
Sorry. Simone Segovac. I work with the Southwest Detroit Community Benefits Coalition, and I'm a Southwest Detroit resident. I wanted to comment about the observation of opacity violations, or the lack of observation, related to tracking out by truck tires. I was the one to ask the question about lot paving, and would like to stress that should be examined as a long-term strategy, because even though there may not be observation of like short-term opacity violations, one, there aren't immediate residents that are very close to that, to Jefferson right there. But what happens is dirt builds up on the trucks track it out, and it builds up on the streets themselves. So it might not be something that billows out right on site, but the trucks that drive past after this is built up on the streets, it creates a problem. And just noting that not only is it a problem for potentially Fort Wayne patrons in the future, but this stretch of Jefferson Avenue is going to be a leg of the Joe Louis Greenway soon. And so there's every expectation that there will be cyclists using a new bike route that will be on Jefferson right in front of the facility. So I wanted to raise that as a concern, and hope that that Eagle, the department, can look into the value of paving this lot and others that create the same problem in other contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Silvergovac, for your comment. Okay, and we're going to just give you guys another minute or so to make sure that no one else would like to make a comment tonight. Okay, Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the actual hearing portion. We will have a little bit more after this closing statement though, so if you'd like to hang around, that would be great and I would appreciate it. So the closing statement for all of you. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on December 18th, 2020. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. So the hearing is now closed. Thank you again for your comments and participation in that. All right, so we do have a little bit more here to go over just for folks. If you didn't make a comment tonight and you really feel strongly about making a comment, we definitely welcome those. I know you've heard that repeated a few times tonight, but we have a few different ways that you can submit comments. You can send them in via regular old mail if you want to do that. And that address is on the screen right now. That will go directly to our permit section supervisor, Annette Switzer. You can also email us comments. The only thing that we would ask is that you put Revere Dock or Revere or something so that we know what your comment is for. So that email address is eagle-aqd-pti public comments@michigan.gov. And then recently, at least once we started doing these virtual hearings, we opened up a voicemail box that we love when people leave comments on. It's awesome. And that voicemail box is 517-284-0900. And again, you know, it kind of gives you instructions, but just let us know what you're commenting on because we do often have more than one permit out for public comment. So that's just really helpful for us. So the other thing that I wanted to just let you know about, and I see that this is my fault, it says renewable operating permit. This is not a renewable operating permit. And I even made a note to myself to delete that and I forgot. So I apologize to everyone. But you can still find that information about this facility online, and I did send you that link in the public or in the chat box there. And you can find that just by going to michigan.gov/air, and then you would click on permits on the left-hand side of the screen and look for our public notice, or even on michigan.gov/air, you can click on the public notice box, and that will lead you to all of our stuff that we have out for public comment at this point. So right now what I have on the screen is just everyone's contact information that you heard from tonight. So if you have additional questions about specific issues, this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of who you can send that to. But you can always send it just to Andy Drury, and if he can't answer it, he can pass it on to folks that can get right back to you. So no worries on that. Definitely utilize us as best as you can and as much as you want to. We definitely welcome that. So I was going to say one other thing to you folks tonight, but I think I don't remember what it was. That comes with age, as some people probably can relate with that with me out there. As you know, I try to remember everything and then I end up forgetting. Oh, I know what it was. So I know we had said that once the decision is made, you all will be notified. So that notification will typically come via email, just so that you know. We also post a response to comments document. And so what that will do is it'll take all those comments that we receive either tonight, via email, via mail, via the voicemail. We kind of conglomerate those all together, put them all together in one document. And we say, you know, here was the comment. This is what happened regarding that comment. We typically also will send a note out to folks just saying like, hey, these are the things that changed or didn't change. Here was the decision on this proposed permit, just so that you know what's going on. That's not going to happen immediately after December 18th. We do have the holiday in there. And, you know, I think our goal is always to try to make a decision as soon as possible. But that being said, we want to ensure that we are taking every single comment into consideration and giving it the time that it needs to be really evaluated. So once we get that decision made, we'll definitely let you know. If you're feeling like you're waiting or did I miss that, you can always, again, just reach out to us and ask. We're more than happy to let you know where things are. So again, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. We know that you have lots of other things that you probably could be doing than doing this, and we appreciate your participation in this public process. It definitely helps us out a lot. If we don't end up seeing you at another public meeting before all of this starts, or gets done, or the holidays come along. We hope that you guys have a wonderful holiday, and maybe we'll even have snow only on Christmas. That's kind of what I want, but I don't always get what I want on things either. So thanks again, everybody, for participating. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night.